Alrighty, task 3. So just a reminder for world language folks, the number of rubrics are different. You have 13 instead of 15. And then it's different for elementary too, by the way, right? I'm only doing secondary. But the world language folks have 2 less, and that's because 2 of the rubrics for the other content areas focus on things like academic language. So you're just by virtue of being world language, you just don't have those 2 rubrics. So yours have 15. So yours looks like this, right? We end with 13. So just try to pay attention to the numbers. I know they're a little bit different for you, but when I say rubric, 11 for the rest of the content areas, it's not the same for you. So you need to just follow with what the content of the rubric is. So just wanted to note that. I'm sure you figured that out already, but I just wanted to make a note of that. Okay, so I'm again sort of sticking with the science one as I have in the previous 2 videos. Here's an overview for task 3, right? Again, most of this stuff is pretty universal across the content areas at the secondary level, as well as the, whatever you want to call them, the all-level classes, the specials, the arts, PE, tech ed, right, all of that. So, again, keep an eye on your content area, but the point here has been and remains that we want to figure out the patterns of what the rubrics are looking for, so you're in good shape as you start to plan things and implement things, okay? So here we go, right? First bullet, select one assessment from the learning segment that you will use to evaluate your students developing knowledge and skills. Attach the assessment used to evaluate student performance to the end of the assessment commentary. Okay, so you have to provide that. Define and submit the evaluation criteria that you will use to analyze student learning. So you need to do a write-up about how and why. You need the rationale as to how you're evaluating them and why you're evaluating them on the content or the skills or whatever it is that you are working on. Collect and analyze student work from the selected assessment to identify quantitative and qualitative patterns of learning within and across learners in the class. So obviously, just looking at numbers, percentages, how are we doing, and also qualitative patterns, just more observable things that you can't necessarily put a number to, but are still important pieces of data. Next one, select 3 student work samples to illustrate your analysis of patterns of learning within and across learners in the class. At least one of the samples must be from a student with specific learning needs. These 3 students will be your focus students. Okay, so what they're asking for here is, it should be pretty obvious, but they're asking for at least one of the 3 students, so choose 3, right, start there. One of the students should be somebody who has some kind of specific needs. They don't need to be special education labeled, but they certainly could be. So there needs to be some level of needs that's going on with them. Okay, pardon me with all of my notifications coming in. We can get into that a little bit more, but again, it doesn't have to be. It could be ELL, for instance, right? It could be somebody who just needs extra supports in general, but not necessarily labeled. Okay. All right, next one. Summarize the learning of the whole class, referring to the work samples from the 3 focus students to illustrate patterns in student understanding across the class. So you're just using those 3 students to sort of talk about what's happening as a whole within the class. And then next one, submit feedback for the work samples for the 3 focus students in written, audio, or video form. So this one is important to know. Like, we need to get into feedback and how well your feedback is supporting students, the rubrics do a good job of explaining what they're about. Next, analyze evidence of students' language use from the video clips, and so that's obviously from task 2, as it says there. An additional video clip of one or more students using language within the learning segment, and or the student work samples from assessment task 3. Okay, we'll get into that more with the rubrics, but just know that there's an option here, right? You can do all 3, you can do 1 or 2, but you gotta at least do 1. So the idea is that basically you're looking at students' use of language. Obviously, the content itself, how well are they using it, how appropriately are they using it, how accurately are they using it, what's missing, are there misconceptions tied to it, etc., etc. So it's just you analyzing their use of language, right? And that's your evidence. Last but not least, analyze evidence of student learning and plan for next steps by responding to commentary prompts. So at the end of this, you need to sort of show, like, where does it go from here, and provide evidence for your rationale. In other words, looking at what students did to give you a heads up for what you need to go ahead and do. All right, so we're going to jump to rubric 11. All right, so this is the first, for most of you, this is the first rubric in task 3. There we go. I can spit it out. Again, if you're world language, you're starting with number 10. Don't worry about the numbers too much. Just worry about the content, right? So stay with me. So go to your first task 3 rubric. Here we are. Analysis of student learning. So here's the question. How does the candidate analyze evidence of student learning related to conceptual understanding, the use of scientific practices during inquiry, and evidence-based explanations, and blah, blah, blah. All of these things are science content area specific. So, but the general concept here is the analysis of student learning. So we're going to try to stay at that space because we know that that's going to be a consistent space throughout all the content areas. So level 3, the analysis focuses on what students did right and wrong, and analysis includes some differences in whole class learning. So what they're getting at here, you see that that second paragraph is in bold. It's not enough to just say, here's what students did right and wrong in general. You also, at the very least for level 3, need to talk about the differences that happened within the whole class. Okay? If you don't do that second part, you're in level 2. So be careful of that. Level 4. Analysis uses specific examples from work samples to demonstrate patterns of learning consistent with the summary. Okay, so here we go, looking at things in a more evidence-based manner. In other words, student work, right, as evidence for you kind of manner. And then the second part here is patterns of learning are described for whole class. And that's going to differ with level 5 because it's not just whole class, right? It's going to be, well, I'll just read it. Analysis uses specific evidence for work samples to demonstrate the connections between quantitative and qualitative patterns of learning for individuals or groups. So you see how it gets much more specific as you head up to level 5. Okay. So level 3, the analysis focuses on what students did right and wrong, and the analysis includes some differences in whole class learning. And you can see how that becomes level 4, using specific examples to demonstrate the patterns, and then level 5, the patterns are looked at in much more detail between individuals and learning groups. So you're not just talking about the whole group, the whole class at that point. Hey, the class did well. right? Period, done. Nope. Now you really need to look who did well, why they did well, why some groups didn't do as well, maybe they didn't do well at all. So that's important to get to in this particular rubric. Understanding those patterns, especially at the individual and the small group levels, that's going to inform your decisions for the next instruction, right? So planning and instruction is going to be based on assessment is the idea here, and they want to see evidence of you at least looking more specifically at what individuals and small groups of students are doing, right? So not just a whole group. Next one, providing feedback to guide learning. Level 3 feedback is specific and addresses either needs or strengths related to learning objectives. Level 4 is going to be both. You talked about the strengths and needs for improvement. Right? So level 3 is one or the other. Hey, you did great on this, good job. Or, oh yeah, this area needs work. Here's what you did, and here's what needs to be done. That's level 3, doing just one of those. Level 4 is both. And then level 5 is doing both. And then feedback for one or more focus students, those are your 3 students, right? Provides a strategy to address an individual learning need or makes connections to prior learning or experience to improve learning. So the feedback is really directed and specific to at least one or more of the focus groups, so you can see that you're connecting with their learning need and, well, in this case, I shouldn't say and or makes connections to their prior learning experiences in order for them to improve their learning. Okay. Next one is student understanding and use of feedback. So if we go back to 12 just for a second, level 5, level 4, right, level 3, all these things are feedback. What type of feedback does the candidate provide to focus students? So you can see that here, right? So that's sort of, an understanding for the evaluators of how you're giving feedback. But now the question is, how well is it going to be accessible to your students? So how does the candidate support focus students to understand and use the feedback to guide their further learning? So level 3, you describe how focus students will understand or use feedback related to the learning objectives. 4 is you describe how you will support focus students, right? That's the bold, that's the change there. And use feedback on their strengths or weaknesses. So this is similar to the last one where you have this sort of or situation when it comes to strengths and needs. You do one or the other. And then level 5 is you're doing both strengths and needs. In this case, they're using weaknesses. Not sure why they changed it from needs to weaknesses between these 2 rubrics, but whatever, it's the same meaning. The idea here is you're describing how the student this is in the prompt as you're describing things. If you let's look at level 5 here. Candidate describes how she or he will support focus students to understand and use feedback on their strengths and weaknesses related to learning objectives. So it's about you describing how you provide the supports for them to work on both their strengths and weaknesses, obviously in connection with the learning objectives. So all of that needs to be there very, very clearly. When you write this out, make sure that you have how you will support students, right? How you do both feedback for strengths and weaknesses, and making sure that feedback for both the weaknesses and the strengths is connected directly to the learning objectives. So we should really see that in your write-up to the students, not just to us, but right to the evaluators. I say us like I'm an evaluator, but I am not. But it should be obvious to the evaluator that the feedback that you gave to the student does all of those things. I would say this: aim for 5. Get in the habit of, before you even start doing whatever this lesson segment is, whatever teaching that you're doing, really practice doing level 5. Okay? So when you give feedback to students, try to do all these things. Comment on their strengths, things that they need to work on, and how they're related to the learning objectives, and really focus directly on what their needs are. Okay? Be specific. Okay. Language use. This is going to be true for most of the content areas. This is where world language does not have one, because just by virtue of being world language, it's sort of inherent in other ways. Level 3. So this is about analyzing students' language. How does the candidate analyze students' use of language to develop content understanding? Okay, level 3. Candidate explains and provides evidence for students' use of language function and one or more additional language demands. So you see the list there: vocabulary, symbols, syntax, discourse. There is a discussion to be had real quick about syntax and discourse. This comes up in previous rubrics and task 1 and 2, 1, whichever. In any case, what's the argument here, or what's the understanding? Vocabulary is obvious, right? Symbols is also obvious, especially in things like math, right? Syntax is not the same as discourse. Syntax, this is such a weird point, in my opinion, is why something like this is in this evaluation, but whatever. Syntax is literally like the structure of sentences, structure, meaning, wording, that kind of things. Discourse is more along the lines of like the actual content that's being taught. Now, whatever, really, like, why that, this becomes a weird sort of thing of folks who are making these, evaluations, I think, getting a little bit granular, maybe more than they need to, but there it is. So you can't go wrong if you're talking about vocabulary, just to be fair, right? At least in level 3. So let's look at level 4. Candidate explains and provides evidence of students' use of the language function. Okay, so that's the same as the last one. Vocabulary and or symbols, and additional language demands. So really all of them in ways that develop content understandings. Okay, so it's not a one or more situation. It's they're in there, all of them, right? So vocabulary's got to be hit pretty hard, obviously, for level 4. It's not sort of an equal choice as it is in level 3. And then level 5 is all of level 4. And then candidate explains and provides evidence of language use and content learning for students with varied needs. So now we're getting into the needs of students, the individual needs of students. Again, the focus students are there, use them, right? And you can talk about how you differentiated for their needs with the use of language. So, in any case, I know this stuff gets a little, it's a little much to slog through. It is, right? I mean, even as somebody, I've been teaching for over 20 years now, and even when I look at this, I mean, I know what it's asking for, but I know as somebody who's a newcomer to teaching, some of this stuff gets to be a little bit much. So keeping track of what's vocabulary versus what's syntax versus what's discourse, these are things that are, they're worthwhile questions. Definitely ask your professors, your university supervisors, your host teachers may or may not have a good grasp on this. This is not language that most of them don't use this stuff on a regular basis. We're I'm trying to say this nicely. I'm not entirely sure this language was entirely needed, but it is there. So you have to sort of make adjustments to make sure that you understand what's going on. Okay, so just keep asking questions of your professors. Your host teacher may have a good grasp on it, they may not. You know, they didn't have to do this, right? This is edTPA is fairly new, so most of the teachers out there didn't have to do anything like this to become a teacher. So, you know, we're in a weird in a place, and I think this is one of those rubrics that just sort of like points that out, unfortunately. Nonetheless, see what you can do, ask questions, okay? And last but not least, using assessment to inform instruction. How does a candidate use the analysis of what students know and are able to do to plan next steps in instruction? So this is, you know, this is not slogging through things anymore. This is what we do, right? This is a core aspect of teaching. So level 3. Next steps propose general support that improves student learning related to the assessed learning objectives. And next steps are loosely connected with research and theory. So again, I'll deal with that second part first. Obviously, this is going to just become more of how connected and justified are you. So superficial to level 5, you see there, justified. It's the same language you've seen before. So just make sure when you do use the research and theory that you're using it in very thoughtful ways. You absolutely can, by the way. I don't know if anybody has said this out loud, but you absolutely can and should use any of the readings that you may have used throughout your education courses. So if you were in the habit of getting rid of things, you know, renting books and all that, whatever semester you're in now, hold on to what you have, because you can use those as part of your research and theory pieces of this. All right, first part of level 3. Propose general support that improves student learning. Obviously, everything has to be related to the learning objectives, duh. So make sure that language is really clear is all I'm saying. So how's it different than level 4? So these next steps are providing targeted support to individuals and groups. Again, you've seen this pattern before, right? Where we go from sort of the general whole class to now we're being more targeted with individuals or groups that need more supports, more work, right? The rest of the language here is tied specifically to science content. So again, you can look at that a bit on your own, in your own content area if you're not science. Last but not least, the language remains the same for level 5. The only thing that changed is just the level of justifications for research and theory. So level 4 and 5 are identical to one another except for the research and theory. All right? Okay, so I hope all of this was helpful. I would, one of the reasons why I made the videos instead of just doing a classroom discussion, lecture, or in-person meeting for this is so that you can keep going back to this and have this while you're doing your student teaching and doing your edTPA portfolio. So save the videos, put them in a good place, come back to them. This is just a sort of an overview to help you out. Obviously, more content-specific area help is needed, but this is just to kind of help you get to the overall patterns of what to write about and how to plan, and how to sort of view the rubrics in a more clear way, so that you have a good sense of what you need to do. All right, that is it. Good luck, and may the force be with you.